Welcome to this episode of the Talent Forge, where together we are shaping workforce behaviors. Today, I am joined by guest Dr. Greg Stewart, who is a multiple time author, coach, consultant, counselor, and somebody who is no stranger to behavior. So, welcome to the show, Dr. Greg.
The pleasure is, of course, all mine, Jay. Thank you for having me, sir.
So we have learned that we shared some geographical roots here, and but I wanted to talk to you about your stories. It's such an
Mm.
interesting one. You've got theology, you've got counseling, you've got organization. Tell us, how did you get to this place?
All right. I'm going to start super early, but don't worry, it's going to go fast. I grew up not too far from you in Schoolcraft, Michigan, Portage, Michigan. And so go blue. Oh, sorry, I had to say that. So when I was a kid, like a lot of us went to church as kids, and so I did too. And that's when I, believed in Jesus when I was a kid. But my parents could go to church, which meant I could go to church. And then I did those awesome party hardy teen years, and then suffered the consequences from those years, and then recommitted my life to Christ. So when I did that, I spent a summer in South America on a missions trip, and I went to a Bible Institute, and I felt called into ministry. So back in the 90s, way back in the 90s, they started the adult and continuing ed programs for all of us who had like 160 credit hours but no degree. And the degree that they offered at the time in the 90s was, the one night a week for a year and you get your degree was in organizational leadership, right? So got it and wanted to get my bachelor's degree and it was good material, but I wanted to get to seminary, which is I got started my master of divinity, which is the Greek Hebrew theology. But major moment number two, I guess, would be after being called to the ministry was my first semester in seminary, I took philosophy of counseling. And I was like, oh my gosh, this material is phenomenal. Like I can use this in ministry and for people. But then also realizing how many issues I had was coming to the surface real quick too, right? That was a joke, right? So then I got my MDiv in 3 years. And then in the year 2000, I got ordained. But I mapped out a dual master. So I got my MDiv in 3 years and then mapped out another master's in counseling. In between those two degrees in the year 2000, like there's a perfect storm. So once I was on vacation, I came across the book Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. And I was like, this is
Great.
interesting.
Yeah.
So, oh my gosh, it was life changing.
Yeah.
So then, secondly, is I started teaching um, as an adjunct professor just to earn some extra money for my alma mater and all the organizational leadership courses I took in undergrad and then fell in love with leadership. But number three is I was underneath a pastor and a great guy, very moral and ethical, but he had some emotional stuff that was going on like from childhood. And we had a kind of a falling out. So they asked him to leave. I became the senior pastor. So the church, I became a Christian as a kid. I actually landed back out. I was a pastor there at that same church for 15 years. So it was definitely
Sure.
an honoring experience. So I got my MA in counseling. And then, so at the time, I was an adjunct professor, I was a pastor, I was a clinical counselor. And then when I became the senior pastor, I got my PhD in counselor education and supervision. But I did my dissertation on the relationship of emotional intelligence with job satisfaction, organizational commitment. And after that, I started working with, there's a medical device company headquartered in Kalamazoo, a very powerful one, and that's where I had the VP of HR of the largest division of my church, and he brought me in to start doing coaching and consulting. So that's where I cut my organizational development coaching teeth on. So after 15 years in the church, we moved to Texas in 2012. And then for 3 years, I worked for an assessments company where we benchmarked top performers and we did leadership 360s. And I traveled all over the country, absolutely loved it, doing strategic seminars for senior leadership teams and then coaching each of the members of the senior leadership teams in developing the individual development plans in personality and EI. Loved it, but the company got bought out, right? And 80% of us got laid off. So, Jay, if you've never been laid off, it's awesome. You got to try it, right? So then I actually switched over to and became a director at a behavioral health hospital. So I've had a plethora of things, but that's how it kind of developed where I was, counseling and then consulting and coaching. So right now I see about 40 clients a week in a mixture
Wow.
of, yeah, 40 clients a week and I absolutely love it and work with them on everything from I call it negative 10 to positive 10, where negative 10 to zero is like counseling, where there's a lot emotions are getting in the way. But then zero to positive 10 is coaching, where I'm helping them become as effective and powerful as they can be. So that's in a nutshell, that's what's going on.
That's such an incredible story, and I love the different sort of like areas because as a behavioral scientist, one of the things I know is I started with just the study of communication as the behavior, and that wasn't
Mm,
enough. So then I studied psychology, and that wasn't enough. And then I started
right.
studying neuroscience, and it was just like all of these different factors. But across my experience, one of the things that has really helped me was seeing people in different environments, their work environments. One of my favorite things you might really appreciate this. When I travel, I love going to grocery stores and just actually seeing like how things are set up because you can learn a lot about behavior just from environment and context. So let me ask you this. Has Because this I think is kind of an interesting question between counseling, between
Yep.
spirituality, and between organizations. What have you learned that really kind of ties maybe those three different entities together? Or are there particular practices that really work well across all three of those different dynamics?
So I would say that I call them the same exact like techniques and philosophy and psychology is across the board, but it's how you package it. So I'm actually going to go to book number three. So my first book was on IQ, where I unlocked the inner strength behind your negative emotions. That's like an individual counseling one. And then because I do so much marriage counseling, the second book was IQ for couples, facing our negative emotions to build intimacy. But my third book was IQ for leaders, where the first two is about the negative emotions and us like going deep and figuring our hearts out. But the third book is a different take on negative emotions, where it's unleash the rage of your negative emotions against the obstacles of becoming more. So I'm going to start there and then go backwards. So in my first chapter of that book, becoming more, that's where I do the psychobabble, like, our mental models that we have to become more. And like, why do we keep hitting the snooze button 7 times kind of thing, just lay the groundwork. But in chapter two, I talk about the becoming more quotient, right? So there's this four boxes where I've always told people that I coach or work with, I say, look, if you can find a book, a proverb, a quote, an article on leadership that doesn't fit into one of these four, I'll buy you lunch, right? Well, I still have my money kind of thing, right? So real quick, it's four areas. So it's IQ, which is we're born with our IQ, right? But the question is, how does one human being influence another human being, right? Well, obviously, if somebody with a high IQ, they're going to be influential, right? We're born with an IQ, but what we can do is we maximize. The goal is to maximize our IQ through two things: informal and formal education, right? So even if it's informal, I think there's PhDs walking around all over the place because they're expert in their fields. So be constant learners. But secondly, is learning critical thinking skills, like
Problem
stuff like
solving skills.
yeah, like problem solving skills, like whether it be to understand biases as
Sure.
opposed to like Bloom's taxonomy. And there's just a number of different ways. So to learn critical thinking skills. Number two is the interplay between personality and emotional intelligence. So IQ, EQ, then personality. So I make a statement in the book where I do not know how we can have a discussion about leadership without discussing our personality, because it's our approach where strength taken too far becomes a weakness, right? So when I worked at the residential treatment center with teenage girls, they used to say, Dr. Greg, you're so extra. And I thought it was a compliment, right? But they didn't mean it as a compliment, right? So it's a strength taken too far. Like I can become too domineering, too impulsive, too critical, or whatever. And when it comes to leadership, the damage that happens when you're either leading someone or following somebody is really much of it is in personality taken too far. So I say personality ran through the machine of EI equals your person leadership effectiveness. So that the interplay of there. But number four is spiritual development and destiny.
Hmm.
Okay. So if you give me permission, I'm just gonna bring in my theology. So a lot of us at least know the story, like in the Bible, that God created everything. Genesis, chapters 1 and 2, everything was great. And Genesis 3, we talk about the fall, right, where Adam and Eve sinned and everything went to hell. But then Genesis 4 through today is both God and man responding to what happened in Genesis 3. In Genesis 4, though, it says that these descendants started becoming shepherds and herdsmen. These descendants started making forming tools. And then these descendants started making musical instruments. When I saw the musical instruments, I was like, that's interesting. So here's my premise for helping people develop their mission statement, right? So let
Hmm.
me pause there and say that for all the books, for everybody, everything we do, Jay, is trying to achieve an emotional goal. I want to feel something like the micro. If I'm thirsty, I want to take a drink of my soda. Um, or if I'm tired of sleep. But then we're all in pursuit of our macro emotional goals, which are, quality of life as determined by standard of living, living our values, and fulfilling destiny, calling, and purpose. And I don't care if you're religious or not, every human being wants to feel that. They want to feel like they're like a legacy, or feel like they have a high quality of life or what have you. So in the spiritual development destiny, Genesis 4, I say that every job ever, every technological advancement ever is either trying to solve a human problem or enhance the human experience. So every company begins with an entrepreneur, right? Caveman walks out and says, "Well, this sucks," and creates the wheel, right? So Howard Schultz, Starbucks, like something's missing here. I want to create an experience. Matter of fact, when I wrote my book, I was on a cruise with my wife, and I note that in the book, it's cruises are not solving human problems; they're enhancing the human experience, which is the musical instruments. So when I help people develop their mission statement, it's deeper in the sense of they look at the world, and I first begin with what of all the problems in the world, which one drives you insane? Like you can't stand it. And there's a bunch of problems, but it's that one. And whatever it is, here's the key: that every single time somebody develops their mission statement, it comes from their personal experiences.
Hmm. Yep.
That's right. So that's where we develop the mission statement. So that's how it kind of all ties in together, is that there's something deeper. And I cannot tell you how many people have signed up for counseling with me because, like, I love telling the story of I had two doctors. One was a radiologist, one was an anesthesiologist from Houston. They didn't know each other. At the same time, they came to me and said, I make about 300K plus per year, but it's like, is this it? Over and over and over again. So that's what's missing. I call it the Iron Man core, right? It's the Iron Man, that inexhaustible energy source. That's your purpose and mission. But that energy source was put there to keep that shrapnel from killing the heart, right? That was the whole point of, saw Iron Man. Without that core, the shrapnel is like life's annoyances. It's taxes, it's traffic. And without a purpose, the human soul will, I mean, just like it will shrivel up, right? So that's where all of it kind of ties in together.
Yeah, I love the quadrant approach there. When I think about for those playing along at home, if you're not familiar, IQ meaning intelligence quotient, generalized, standard intelligence, and the EQ, as you mentioned, Goldman, generally
Yep.
has two different domains. It's the domain of awareness and it's the domain of response, and that is measured against internal versus social. The personality, there's a number of different personality assessments out there, whether it's DISC, Myers-Briggs, whether it's
Yep.
the actual clinical diagnostic, NEO-PIR, or any of the other ones. And then we get to that sort of the spiritual legacy purpose. I love how you've kind of positioned those four things because I do see not only every leadership book, but I mean, most trainings or most organizational development programs would probably fall into one of those different things. How are we achieving, setting mission, goal, purpose, strategy, direction versus how am I showing up each and every day? I want to dig in on the emotional side of things. I would be remiss if I didn't spend time with you
Right.
on
Sure.
emotions, right? Emotions in most instances, we look at emotions as generally autonomic, right? They're part of the autonomic nervous system. They pop up in different aspects. There's external stimuli. There's also internal stimuli, how much rest I've had, how much food I've eaten, how many
Sure.
different
Right.
aspects, right? So we know
Mhm.
that we have these emotions. We don't necessarily get to quote control our emotions. I might feel jealous and then regret feeling jealous and then regret feeling regret and then feel guilty that I felt jealous. I don't get to control that. What are some of the ways? Because these emotions, as you so accurately point out, drive a number of, we're going to call them negative consequence behaviors. I don't like to say bad behavior, I like to say good behavior. Every behavior
Mhm.
has a purpose. It's serving an emotion or it's serving a need. But some have negative consequences, some have
Yep.
positive.
Yep. For
So
sure.
how do we better regulate some of those powerful neurotransmission signals that are hitting us that we call emotions and stop ourselves from putting our foot in our mouth, stopping ourselves from beating ourselves up. Because I think this is a behavior that we see in every leader, in every HR place,
Mhm.
every talent development space. How do we navigate, Dr.
Right.
Greg?
All right. So one is that yeah, it's our mental model, right? So our mental model gives an auto response, right? And that's where we say we can't control. We can't control the auto response. Other than a key component of emotional intelligence is impulse control,
Hmm.
right? So there are techniques that, and I've experienced it where I am about ready to, punch a hole in the wall, but I have to control. So we can't control the energy, but we can control the expression, right? Okay, so one is that I use this illustration where I say behind us is the house of our heart, right? And we're standing on the front lawn, and before us are all these things and people facing the house of our heart, like that are upsetting us, right? So let's say that Jay calls me a name, right? Which he never would because he's so nice, right? But let's say Jay calls me a name. And I use I say there's three tenets to emotions. One is that emotion is energy. Okay. Think of emotions. So there's good energy, right? Quality of life. But like you said, there's not bad, but negative energy. And that's simply used to have solve problems. Secondly, is to have the right brand or type of emotion. Like when people, a lot of people say that I have anxiety, but it's actually stress, like control calm versus no control. And it's huge because when our frontal lobe says I have anxiety, our mental model will respond as if there was something out of our control, but that's not the case. So we have to label it correctly, but then have the right brand type and the right amount. So a scale of 1 to 10. So Jay calls me a name on a scale of 1 to 10. There's two ways to assess it. Like, what's the worst that can happen? Like, what bad happens because Jay calls me a name on a scale of 1 to 10? Well, it's like a 0.5, right? Nothing, But then it's how much emotional energy do I need to respond to it? Like, Jay, stop it, right? Now, that's fine. But here's the issue that on the amount, the issue is that even though it should be a 0.5 or a 1, I'm at a 6, 7, or 8. And right there is, I call it the inflation of emotions.
Hmm.
So, which we all have, but that's where we have to walk into them. So I say at that point, so you got to turn around and walk in the house of your heart because like I can't dump a 6, 7, or 8 of emotional energy on Jay because it's going to get far worse. It's not going to be emotionally intelligent and it'll just damage, right? So I have to stop. I say you got to put down the microscope and pick up the mirror, right? And we see this in organizations, we see this in our families everywhere. So when I walk in the house of my heart, I say tenet number 3 is that all negative emotions exposing something in you, right? It sounds bad, but it's actually very freeing. So I work with every client and leader and say, look, as much as possible, remove all power from the environment. So a quote in my book is nothing bothers me unless it should, right? Because it should, if it should bother me, you can't be passive. So in the first room is insecurity, right? Then I say that I do the emotions of insecurity, anxiety, fear, worry, anger, depression. So like anxiety's in the kitchen, right? Fear's crouched in the hallway, worry's looking out the front window, anger is walking around the bedroom, and depression's laying in bed. So the first major reason for the inflation of emotions is simply we believe a lie, as some lie like, Jay meant it. He hates me. Or somebody will say, like, I'll never get a job. And I cannot tell you how much, like, and here's the key, emotions don't produce themselves. They come from sentences of interpretation in our mind, beliefs, ideas, right?
Dr. Greg,
So, yeah,
let me
yeah.
ask a question on that. Can the lie then also be something of Jay's right?
What do you
Right?
mean, Jay's right?
If I call a name, generally, whatever the name is, right?
Oh,
Somebody that sort of just like, you're right, I am. If I say
oh,
this is a terrible person and somebody goes, you know what, maybe Jay's right, I am a terrible person. Can that also be the lie that we
yeah, because you believe lies about yourself, right?
Okay.
The first room is that's why the first room is insecurity. Insecurity is like I always tell when I worked at a hamburger joint in Michigan, and I was 14 years old. We were all friends there, but Jay, I used to be a super sarcastic teenage guy, but you can see I matured, right? So I teased this girl once. She was my friend, but I teased her so bad one time I made her cry. And as she's walking away, I remember the moment I yelled out, "You wouldn't get so ticked off if it wasn't true." And I
Mm,
pause, like while she's crying, I pause and I went, oh my gosh, Greg. So every time you get upset, defensive, butthurt, they say, or whatever. It's got to be truth, because when I saw people trash talk, if somebody really wants to hurt the feelings of another person, outside of your mama jokes, they use true statements,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Right. Otherwise, it's just like, Jay, I'm concerned. I've got it. Hey, for everybody, like, Jay, I'm concerned about your heroin addiction. And you're like, okay, great, right? If it's not true. So
Right.
insecurity is something I don't like about myself, but the issue is not that, because we all have that. The issue is I don't want it exposed, and not wanting exposed where I get defensive. But if it's true, right? So you own it. So the first thing is, we have to assess it. Is it true or not true? Right. So I'm just saying, like, if it's like, I'll never get a job, well, that's not true. What you could say, you have to replace it. So you have to replace the lies with truth, meaning, look, if I'm honest with myself, I didn't try very hard in high school and college. So what kind of job am I expecting to get? But if I work hard, learn a trade, go back to college, I can. But it's about the truth, because that produces the right amount of negative energy to burn, right?
Mhm.
So lies is the number one reason. Secondly, is off the room of insecurity is a doorway that goes into the basement. And in the basement is the machine of identity, value, and worth, right? Whenever we say that we're taking things personally, what we're saying is, whatever the negative event is, it's impacting our value and worth, and it should not. And when you talk about, like, leaders with Napoleon's disease, or insecure leaders, or they got to post up, or where the case is, and like positional power, that's what we're talking about. It's impacting their value, their significance, and it shouldn't. And there's a whole process I deal with that. But number three, often the basement, is the dark, dingy cellar door of trauma. Now, there's big T official trauma, which very few of us have experienced, but almost every single one of us have experienced little T trauma, where a bad experience that just rocks our world. So that could be the carryover effect, where I'm reminded, like, my mental model goes, oh, great, Greg, here we go again. And it scoops up the emotion from the past and dumps it. So those are three major reasons for the inflation. So that's where, yeah, it's an auto response, man. But we got to walk into those negative emotions, because if I'm sitting there just burning all this emotional energy on the microscope on Jay, it's like, what I'm saying is, the solution to my negative emotions is Jay changing. Well, I'm screwed, right? So no, I need to deal with Jay on the point 0.5 or 1, but the inflation is my issue. That's where I say, in all three books, you've got to walk into that and figure that out, because that's your issue, not theirs.
Well, and it seems to me, and I love that you brought in the concept of reframing, right? Like, okay, well, this is the lie that I'm telling myself. I need to
Hmm.
replace that. What is the actual truth that I need to be telling myself? Maybe I didn't work as hard. Maybe I think that really
Yep.
kind of goes to the core of ownership, right? Like stepping into our own power and not necessarily being subjected to our own ruminations or our own interpretations, because that can be really dangerous. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. So you have to, it's just a constant process of, like, a long time ago, Jay, I've already assessed, like I said, look, my mental model is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I mean, I'm sold, because I don't have all the information in any situation. And the formulas by which I process information, they're going to be off. So then I need to be teachable. Like, so going back to leadership, when I worked with senior leadership teams, I'd ask the question, like, who are the worst leaders you've ever been under, and who are the best? Invariably, there's a bunch of answers, but there's always two that rose to the top. The first one is they don't listen,
Hmm.
right? Which
Yep.
means their own agenda. Like, or secondly, they're not teachable. So I'm yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say the listen, to stick with that one for a second, kind of
Mhm.
made me think about the walking into the basement in your analogy of not feeling valued, not feeling worth, like, oh, I'm not even worth listening to. You're not valuing my opinion. So, like, in that regard, I can see a leader who doesn't listen is essentially tapping into that basement level for somebody of saying, why am I even here? Would that
Yeah,
resonate?
it's a definitely, because why aren't you listening? Because it could be a pride thing. You don't care what this person says. Um, but it's really about, like, it could be about value and worth. Or not listening means that I am speaking truth to you, that something needs to change here, or you need to change, and you're no, because what is pride? Pride is, nope, Jay, I've got all the information I need at all times, and my formulas are spot on, so no thank you. That's
Mhm.
pride, right? So I talk about the Johari window model when it comes to the blind area. Like, again, I learned that as a kid. The blind area, that Jay sees something about me that I don't see, freak me out. So I came up
Sure.
with two things that I add to every single leader's individual development plan. One is the practice of the skill of empathy, restating using synonyms what people say. And I got a technique for it, right? Because why? It is about the human experience, right? So when the best leaders flip it, the best leaders are the ones who listen. Like, man, I was talking to the CEO at the Christmas party, and I was like, I was the only person in the room. That's where you get like referent power because the CEO cares just on a human basis. But the CEO is like, everybody's got good ideas, right?
Sure.
So, number one is just empathy. But secondly, I call it proactive teachability. So, I asked the question, what is your plan or strategy for eradicating your blind area?
Mm,
Because if you don't see it, right, what's your plan? It can't be reactive teachability. Why? Because everybody's afraid of conflict. I can't wait for Jay to walk in my office and say, Greg, dude, you are blind because we're afraid of conflict. So I'm not going to wait for that. So every leader, I say either one person a week or two people a week, go up to people and say, Jay, how can I grow? Where do you think I'm blind? And Jay will be nice to me. I'm like, Jay, no. I want like there's 10% in the back of your brain that you would never, ever, ever tell me. I want that for two
yeah.
reasons. One is you could be believing something about me that I'd like to correct that's not true about me, or you might see something about me that I desperately need to see. So like lay it on me. Like I sacrifice myself. Like that's pro teachability. Every leader needs to. And then think about what proactive teachability, because every human being, it's like a human thing. Everybody kind of sits back and says, man, I wish my leader would do that. I wish my spouse would do that. Well, I should do that. So every human being should. So when leaders in the leadership teams do proactive teachability, it changes the culture of the organization. It's
You
powerful.
you totally tripped a story in my mind of something that was really meaningful at one point in time. Now, when I was coming up, when I was growing up, I'm going to call it, 15, 20 years ago, as I
Right.
was learning leadership and everything else like that, I I was a former competitive debater in the university. I'm very competitive in general. Some people would call me extra as well, or maybe overly extroverted or anything else. Well, when I was in those positions, I would always advocate so passionately, so directly, and I always looked fairly confident in what I was saying because that's how I was trained. I ended up at a leadership conference, and it's one of my dear friends. Hopefully he's listening. I'll give him a little credit for it. His name's Justin, and Justin Woodsky, who we ended up getting partnered and having to share a room during this experience, this retreat. And I didn't think anything of it. We go into the retreat. It's awesome. We have a great time. Justin and I stay up laughing and talking and sharing stories, etc. Well, afterwards, I'm like, Justin, this has been really great. He's like, yeah, Jay, it has. He's like, honestly, I was dreading this. And I was like, I'm
Hmm.
sorry, what? He's like, well, you're just so different than I thought. I see you as you're presenting or whatever, and you're just domineering and you're aggressive and this and that and the other thing. I had never perceived myself as that. I perceived myself as confident and passionate. But then it was something that he had opened up this complete blind spot to me, and I tell this story. He's heard me tell this story. I'm so grateful for that. Like that was the 10% in the back of somebody's mind that's not coming out. So I really, really appreciate that tactic of no, tell me what you don't want to tell me because that's the only way I'm going to grow. From that point forward, I really shifted a lot of behaviors because I didn't want to be perceived that way.
Right. And real quick, so that's why I love EI because, like you said, there's self and others, self-awareness, others awareness, self-management, others management, or relationship management. But the chronological flow is self-awareness first, right? Yet,
Yep.
like, what am I thinking, feeling? What's my current? But I think that the key to EI, the brilliance of EI, the mastery of EI is in the second one, which is others awareness, which I've relabeled to situational awareness
Yeah.
because the situation is the king. It's the brick wall. It's not moving. True EI is to be able to, which is number three, self management. So if the situation and I match, like Greg, you be you, but if there is a gap at all, I can't look at the situation, which a lot of foolish leaders do, and say, you mold yourself to me. No, I need to be emotionally intelligent and imitate the right approach, like the either extrovert, introvert, people oriented. So in some situations, some people would look at you and say, oh gosh, I thought Jay was pretty tame. But to other temperaments, they're like, whoa, that dude is intense. because the situation determined upon personality who the person is, the group is, right? So we read the situation and we mold ourselves to it. That is EI in a nutshell. And for like number the last one, relationship management, I separate that out because in my book I just give a bunch of communication skills that we can use, because what's relationship management? It's communication, right? So the actual flow is self-awareness, situational awareness, self-management. But that's what you're talking about, is he sees you as this intense guy, whereas you and I'd be like, oh, I thought Jay was pretty chill,
Yeah,
right?
right.
It's about perception, right? Based upon the situation.
So let's make this practical if we can. I'm going to go back to something that you had said earlier because I think this is so powerful, right? And becoming aware that our emotions are driving a number of our behaviors in the workplace or even in
Yep,
our
yep.
personal life, starting to look at some situations. Let's go back to that person that you had brought up. You had said, the person at the office that's so angry they want to put their fist through the wall.
Mhm.
Okay. You had mentioned there's a couple of tactics maybe that you could do in that very moment to gain, grab awareness, and to essentially walk ourselves back from that. And I love the concept of kind of going into the heart and those.
Yep,
In the moment,
yep.
we know that, cortisol, adrenaline,
Yes,
norepinephrine, all of that pumping into the brain, it's not creating the conditions for us to be as rational as we potentially could be.
yep.
What are
Mhm.
some practical, tactical behaviors that we can do instantly to stop ourselves or give ourselves maybe a little bit of that space to make a better behavioral decision?
Right. Okay. So whether it be I'm observing that person or I am that person, right? So in my first book in chapter one, so when I talked about everything we do is achieving an emotional goal, right? I didn't say that that's great. All the emotional goals are good, but the issue is the path we take to achieve the emotional goal. We have to assess the action, the behavior, the path to achieve the emotional goal, which I use all the way through my books is RHWR, rational, healthy, wise, and right. For instance, if I'm trying to achieve the emotional goal of I'm stressed out, I don't want to be stressed, but I choose the pathway of drinking alcohol every day at 5, right? It achieves the emotional goal, but it's not rational, healthy, wise, or right. My point is that a great de-escalator of intensity and conflict is always point out and agree with, because you can, the person's emotional goal. And I say for you, separate the emotional goal, because we get angry. Anger is a result of blocked goals. There's an actual physical goal, and then there's an emotional goal. Like I'm feeling disrespected. That's an emotional goal. So whether we observe somebody who's super angry, immediately connect to that person on their emotional goal, right? We often go after the path, like don't do that. But as soon as we attack the action without the validation of the emotional goal, everybody merges the emotional goal with the path. So they see us as blocking the emotional goal as well. But it's like, I'm not going to be disrespected. See, it's like, right?
Yeah.
So immediately begin with, I want you to be respected, right? I want this goal achieved. So agree with the emotional goal, but then you can see to separate the path, the action, the response from the emotional goal.
So from an internal side, is that a practice that maybe like if I'm
Yes.
experiencing this anger, I might say, okay, hey, here's why. And really kind of just being like, it's okay for me to feel angry. It's not okay for me to put my hand to that wall. The anger that I'm feeling is a result of being blocked. Is this. What else could I do to overcome that barrier? Is that kind of what the
Right.
internal dialogue?
Exactly. And so like every emotion, like they say anger is a secondary emotion, but what that actually means is that, first of all, like insecurity, anxiety, fear, worry, anger. So if you say I'm insecure, I'm anxious, I'm afraid, I'm worried, I'm like, those are underdog emotions. But as soon as you go angry, your focus goes from what I'm feeling to outward again, which means you're blowing it, you're putting all the power in the external. My point is like when I talk about number two is to have the right label or type, like I said, anxiety versus stress. With anger, you got to first like what goals of mine are being blocked, and then secondly, you got to grab that puppy and drag it below the line again and say, because all anger is a result of fear, and it completely disarms us. Where we That's like a technique, because anger, I'm again focusing on you. It's I'm angry at, but if I say, but what goal of mine is being blocked? Back to internal, and what am I afraid of? What's the worst that can happen if Jay keeps calling me that name or whatever it is, right? It's a result of fear. So we have to like bring the power back inside of us and say it's our issue first before we can go out to address it, right? So that's what we're talking about is like number one is emotional goal from path. And then secondly, it's how do I respond with what's actually happening with the labels of these emotions, especially when it comes to anger. Anger is always a result of fear.
Yeah. It's this is such a powerful conversation because, whether we're working in retail, real estate, whether we're working in the manufacturing floor, or whether we're working in an executive office, there's going to be those aspects where emotions come into play and they try to hijack whatever our decision-making processes are. It it seems to me one of the things that could be a real big value for people, and help me understand if I'm right here, is maybe learning the nuances between the different emotional labels. So maybe studying the emotion wheel and saying, okay,
Yeah.
is this
Yeah.
really fear, or is this more anxiety, or is this more stress, or is this more excitement, or is this more
Mhm.
joy, or and
Right.
really kind of nuancing because language is limited, but it's all we have. So
Yeah.
if we're able to maybe communicate those feelings more effectively, does that help, Dr. Greg?
Yeah, like I have an emotional wheel and there's an emotional chart with hundreds of emotions. And when you're able to, especially when you restate to somebody, hey, it's not that I'm feeling upset, it's just I'm more despondent. Well, the nuance difference between discouraged and despondent, right? So when you're able to restate, like, yes, this is exactly what I'm feeling, that's one. But let me kind of flip it and I'm gonna kind of, end with the I cubed process because I put the chapter on I cubed at the end of each book because it's like this little technique summarizes all the psychobabble, if you will. So, real quick, the IQ process is like the Panama Canal. So, the first lock has to fill up before the second lock opens, right? So, information, interpretation, intensity. So, on information, that lock has to fill up before you can go to interpretation. So, the rule is that, and I applied this years ago, 25 years ago, I'd say, Greg, it is illegal, I like that word, illegal for me to have any opinion, interpretation, or any emotion intensity until I have all the information, right?
Mm,
Because how many times have been like, no, Greg, it's not that, it was this. And suddenly I'm like, oh, one little piece of information changes
assumption. Yeah.
everything. Right.
Yeah.
So here, like biases. Now, I always like to say, imagine if that one rule was applied in our culture and society. It is illegal to have any opinion or any emotion until you have all the information. It would change the world, right? So let's see, right? The information fills up. The second one is where we get into critical thinking, which is interpretation. The rule there is simply like you be a negative, neutral, and positive, right? So obviously you're thinking negative about something, but the key thing is on critical thinking, is there any other way of looking at it? And this is where you step out of your emotions. So forget like the nuances, like step out of your emotion. And what I have found over and over again is there are several, like five, six, or seven. I work with clients, like there's could be six statements that are almost like paradoxical. They're like completely opposite, but they all are true and coexist in how to interpret this information.
Hmm.
Well, on the one hand, this, on the other hand, that. But
The
all of them must.
stories we tell ourselves and that
Oh
other
my gosh,
people
I
tell you.
use
Yeah.
that phraseology in my book,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
so once you lay out all the statements of interpretation, here's what's weird: is the emotions, like the intensity, are like almost like a domino effect where they just naturally play out because your emotions will be like go up and down according to the information and interpretation. So, like you can either go into the emotions, like when you're being exposed, or use the IQ technique where I'm first going to get the information and then critically think, step out of myself. What are all the ways to interpret this? And then just naturally comes the amount of emotional energy. And then I can determine how to respond to it. So it kind of flips it on its head. So I end the books with that one technique because it's like the summary of all of the stuff that came before it.
I think it's a powerful thing. And I also think I really actually like how you had mentioned Bloom's taxonomy. So for any of our trainers that are listening to
Yeah,
this,
right.
they're going to know exactly what that is. But it does kind of remind me of that first level of learning is just like, can I recall it? Can I understand it? And then I can move to the like, okay, can I interpret it? Can I evaluate it? And then can I apply it? And can I actually create with it or design with it? So it seems to me that it follows almost that natural learning process. I get the information. Once I have it, I can then evaluate it. Once I can evaluate it, then I can actually apply whatever the response appropriate. I'm going to say appropriate response is.
Yeah,
Going to
yeah.
11 because somebody finished off the orange juice is probably not the appropriate level of response. Where maybe
Right.
a short conversation could resolve it.
Right. And then in my chapter on critical thinking, so I'm Bloom's taxonomy, like obviously the bottom three levels are all about the training, like inform our knowledge, comprehension, application. So I call it training by rhetorical question,
Yeah.
right? Do you think people like it when you say hi to them, right? So kind of thing. But the top three levels is where I get into the book, where it's analysis, synthesis, evaluation, and I'm like, how can we take those three topics to like with senior leadership teams to break down all of your business assumptions and strategies and break everything down, saying there is a way to break all this down so I can that's the interpretation. So yes, there's knowledge comprehension application, but let's step back and say what are we all dealing with here on this topic? Because again, instead of the micro, we have to look more macro and break it all down theoretically, then synthesis, bring it all back together. So I even tap into the upper three levels when it comes to even strategy planning.
That's amazing. This has been an incredible conversation, Dr. Greg, and I want to say thank you for that. But before I do, if our audience wanted to get in touch with you, how would they reach out to you?
So if you can see my name on the screen, Dr. Greg Stewart, just take out the period.com. Right?
All right,
It's
perfect.
just DRGREGSTWART.com. That's why I like that. Right. So drgregstewart.com, and I have everything there.
That's beautiful. So I will make sure that we get that into the show notes. But thank you, Dr. Greg, for taking the time.
My honor.
Yeah, no, it's been an incredible conversation. I love being able to dig in with fellow behavioral scientists, enthusiasts,
Yeah.
counselors, psychologists on some of these major issues that you're right. What if the world actually abided by the law of I'm not allowed,
Yeah.
it's illegal for me to form an opinion until I go through this process? It would
Yeah.
be a better world. So I hope you continue to keep making a better world and just thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience and wisdom with our audience here today.
Yeah. Bless you, Jay. Thank you. I love the conversation, man.
And thank you, audience, for tuning into this episode of The Talent Forge, where together we're shaping workforce behaviors.